Hello and welcome to the Brass Band Podcast. I'm Sarah Bauman.
And I'm Kenny Crookston. And together we're here to talk about all things brass banding, from the unique individual stories to the innovative developments and the future of this musical culture. So, whether you're a seasoned brass band lover,
Just getting started,
or just curious, you're in the right place.
let's go! Welcome back to the podcast studio, Kenny.
Hi Sarah, how are you?
I'm good. Today we're talking about brass band music, the composers, the commissions, which drew me to the brass banding world so much when I was first dipping my toe in. Composition was a big focus for me personally when I was at university, and being involved in contemporary music groups and new music commissioning was something that I spent a lot of time when I was at uni doing. And I certainly didn't know or realise the commissioning culture that happens in brass banding. And it was such an amazing revelation to me. It was incredible.
It's that great cornerstone of brass banding that's always been there throughout my life and for a long time before that as well. I mean, it really goes back to 1913 when John Henry Iles commissioned Fletcher to write Labour and Love for the National, which was the first original contest composition for brass band. And from that point onwards, really, that great tradition continued right through until the beginning of this century, really. I'm sure there are many reasons why it's discontinued, and I'm sure there's a good conversation in that fact alone. But it is possibly the thing that has given brass band people a great appetite for new music. Every year you got this classic delivered to you on a plate, and our core classic repertoire is essentially built on music by the great British composers of their time. We seem to have kind of fallen a bit behind that curve in the last few years, and we'll talk about that possibly later. But no, it's been a remarkable journey for brass bands, and even in the time that I've been playing since the early 1970s, the style of the music has changed so much, very often in a good and even great way. But it doesn't mean we should forget some of the great repertoire that we've got there from the past, and it's still good to hear some of these classics when we do get the chance.
I think for me, it's the range stylistically that we see as well that's so exciting, and the quantity as well, in a way that we don't really see so much in the orchestral world, certainly at the level. Maybe that's because there's so much music out there. I don't know. I think arguably there's tons of great brass band music now as well. But there is the extreme contemporary. There's really good youth band music. There's really good soft feel good, but there's also a really good, healthy, listenable but challenging contemporary repertoire. And I think that's quite unusual. I certainly think that's unusual in other genres.
Yeah, and the best composers, of course, are able to write across all ranges. You know, we had a work recently from Philip Spark for Youth Champs that we commissioned along with Holland and Lithuania, the banding bodies there. And it was fantastic. I think everybody really loved it, you know, and it absolutely hit the spot. But the same Philip Spark had written the test piece for European Championships a year earlier, and he's written much of their great repertoire. Peter Graham, Philip Wilby, they've all done it, written right across the sections. And good music is good music, regardless of how difficult it is or is perceived to be. But I think that it's important that there are opportunities for new voices to be heard as well. And a lot of bands in the last few years have been extremely good at going out and finding these, often through young composer schemes and the like. We've been involved in some collaborations as well, some very young composers through BBE and AMP, the body that you have an association with as well. So there are plenty of good things happening. I think where it's really fallen down a bit though is the major events that have driven repertoire throughout all our lifetimes have taken less responsibility for that over recent years. There are still some good examples. You know, the British Open has collaborations it gets involved in with European countries. And we see the new piece of Stephen Roberts this year, albeit based on classical music, but it's still creative and it's still investment. But I think there is a major onus upon people who run banding events to make sure that that repertoire is kept fresh. I know that the conversations we're having around the 2028 European Championships, we never go through a single meeting without talking about the music that could be played.
It's the heart of everything, particularly for a test piece contest. It has to be quality, it has to be exciting, it has to be right for bands and right for audiences. It's a very high bar, actually.
It is. And, when it's a set test piece, I guess there's a perception that it has to contain a number of elements that, it's got to be a test, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. But principally, it's got to be good music. The one we had the last time was great, wasn't it? Philip Wilby's piece, Saints Triumphant, based on the music of Vaughan Williams. But you could tell that there was a life's work in there for Philip. He was very passionate about it. And he really hit the spot on that occasion. It doesn't always work out like that. There have been some fairly unmemorable European Championship test pieces in the last few years. I'm not saying they're not good, but after a while they'll start to sound a bit alike when they contain mainly the same elements.
I think there's a legacy question, isn't there? It should have life after the event it's being commissioned for, rather than just being put back on a shelf. And I think when you're in that debate as to, well, do we bring back the classics or do we commission? I think there is a valid argument that sometimes the classics are brought back for a reason, because they're good music, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be driving forward, but it's about how we keep people accessing the music that has been commissioned for a specific event or a specific thing.
And we have to be careful as well. You have to play to an audience.
Yeah.
The current trend seems to be that the days of the 20-band major test piece contest in which every band gets a really great audience in a big hall, it's possibly a thing of the past. We're still getting decent audiences going to listen to some bands, but the appetite for a few thousand people spending the whole day in the hall and traditionally with their sandwiches and their flasks and everything like that, these days are gone forever. Yeah. And I think if you tried to sell that today as a new concept, people would think you were probably a bit mad. But the tradition is there, and it's how we've done it over these years. So, maybe it's worth trying to work to try and maintain that tradition to some degree. But ultimately, we'll have to be playing to an audience that wants to listen to the music that it's hearing. And that music has changed so much that the people who are listening to it now are very, very different from those who were at Bellevue the first time I went there, say in 1977. And as I remember, it was pretty packed for most of the bands. But you were listening to a good old kind of pot boiler, Diadem of Gold, which the audience absolutely lapped up for the whole day. But it was full of drama, and it was plenty of drama on the day, as I remember as well. But they were a particular type of audience that wanted to hear music in that style. And if you move too far away from that, you don't take them with you. And maybe we need to stop sometimes and just take a look at what we are actually trying to achieve in relation to our audience.
The context is so important, isn't it? Because, again, just kind of thinking about orchestral commissioning, it wouldn't be unusual for a programme of very traditional works and after the interval 5-minute new commission that stands out very differently is quite normal. Because so much of commissioning is driven by test pieces, which are longer, chunkier, often harder piece at any level, do you think that it's harder for bands outside of a contesting environment to use those pieces because of those constraints?
I think finding the opportunities for performance these days definitely getting harder and harder, especially when you're talking about the serious side of the contesting game, I guess you could call it. But it is definitely getting harder and harder. That number of serious classical venues that would normally have put annual brass band series on certainly greatly reduced again, and maybe that's an indication that the audience were not getting what they were wanting. And I'm sure if these venues could fill their hall every week with a brass band, they'd be quite happy to do it. But when it becomes a harder sell, maybe that's something that we need to reflect on as a community in general.
Is there a highlight piece for you that you really remember that was really impactful?
What I remember was, as a young, new to the playing at the Albert Hall level in the championship section, playing there a lot in the 1980s, and it seemed that every year you got a great new test piece. I mean, the first one I played there was ironically not new. It was contest music. It'd been around for 10 years or so. But one of the most fantastic pieces you'll ever hear or play. But you were playing music, you were getting stuff like Joseph Horowitz, Ballyford Band. Lovely piece, a really beautiful piece of music. Dances and Arias, Cloudcatcher Fells from John McCabe, Philip Spark wrote harmony music, Seascapes from Ray Steadman Allen, you had Odin from Arthur Butterworth. Real massive classics of the repertoire in my mind. And it was that whole period, I just thought, it was the early days of when Boozy and Hawkes had taken over the running of the National, and you have to hand it to them. They played an absolute blinder in terms of commission. And there was good commissions in the lower sections as well. They'd still use recycled, for want of a better word, at that time, but there was good commissions throughout the whole event. But the stuff that they were producing for the championship section at that time was magnificent. And every year was oh my God, how am I going to be able to play this in 3 months' time?
Yeah.
And what do? You go and you practice like mad, and somehow you manage to produce some sort of performance with varying results, I'll say.
But there's drive there to do it, and there's drive from the organisers to do it. It was in their interest for lots of reasons for Boozy and Hawkes to really, really push that and to champion that music.
It's not just investment in the event, it's investment in the future of banding. Because that great music, a lot of the pieces that I've just said, have been used countless times in future events. You talk about legacy, there it is right there. A piece like contest music, my God, I mean, it's been used at every contest you can imagine, more times than anybody could count. But there's a reason that bands wanted to keep playing it.
Yeah.
So this is an important aspect to modern day banding, I think, that lack of focus on new music. It's not just for the sake of having new music, it really is investing in the event, and it's investing in the future of banding. And it's very, very important that it happens.
I think it's probably time that we heard a little bit of brass band music. We've got So Spoke Albion, played by Tredegar Band, composed by Gavin Higgins, which was their own choice piece for the European Brass Band Championships in 2022, which we delivered in Symphony Hall in Birmingham. So we're going to hear a little snippet of that piece, and then you're going to hear Kenny speak directly to Gavin about his experience of composing for brass bands.
Hi Gavin, thanks for joining us on the Brass Band podcast. We've just been talking about brass band repertoire, from the great classics, starting with Labour and Love over 100 years ago now, to the works being performed by bands today. Notably at events like the European Championships, the Open, the National, all very topical right now. What do you see as the most important aspect of having new music at these events though? Why do you think it has to be new?
Well, I'm a composer, so I'm always going to say we need new music, otherwise I'd be out of a job. But it's the same conversation with classical music, is you can't just keep playing old, dead people's music all the time at the expense of living composers' music. You just become a museum. Music is not a museum. It happens there and then. The performance is, if you're there, you hear it. And if it's recorded, you might hear it again. But it isn't a museum. It should be a living, breathing thing. So we absolutely need to have lots of new music to play. It's really important for the musicians. It's important for the audiences. The amount of times I've been in a room with a conductor who's gone, oh, if only Beethoven was alive today, we could ask him about this bit. If only Sibelius was alive, we could ask him about these tricky bars here. I'm like, well, there's plenty of us who are alive. You could have that conversation with them. Also, it can be really collaborative, I think, if you're working with someone there and then. Sometimes I write music and we rehearse it, and it's only in the rehearsal that I find something isn't quite working, and you kind of come to an agreement on how you can make that work. So lots of edits go into my pieces after the first performance, talking with the conductor and players and stuff. And, you can't do that with people who are long dead. You have to just accept that that's what it is. And maybe if they were having their music played by bands who are as good as they are today, they might change a few things. Music should be a living, breathing thing. I think composers have a lot to say about the world we now live in. The world is very different now to when Labour and Love was written. So I think composers and audiences have different interests and different things they're looking for in music. But without composers, without new music, the whole thing just dies. And when we just become a sort of artifact that just plays stuff from a bygone era. I'm not against that. A lot of that old music I love, but you have to invest in the talent of the future. So yeah, I think it's vital.
Of course, a lot of the classic repertoire I've just been speaking about was written for competition, especially back in what they call the golden era, the period between the two world wars especially. Do you see a difference in the purpose of contest music and the way that it's written? Do you have a different approach to writing contest music to your repertoire that you would normally produce for the wide variety of musicians that you write for?
You think about these old staples that, were contest pieces. But first and foremost, they were pieces of music. All of that amazing repertoire by Vaughan Williams, Holst and Herbert Howells. It's music first and foremost. And if there's a technical challenge to it, or if there's a musical challenge to it, that's just part of the thing. They've not written the pieces to just be challenging. And I think something shifted, particularly in the last 10, 15 years or so, where the quality of the actual music, I think, has plummeted, if I'm being brutally honest. And there's been this sort of fight for pieces that are ever more technically challenging, faster. How long can we play treble forte for at the end of a piece now and still do a crescendo to fiver? It's sort of lost the important bit, which is the music, I think. And part of that is probably because, back in the day, of course, there were people who were working within the brass band world itself who were writing purely brass band music. But there was a lot of composers from outside the brass band world who were interested in writing it. And then that obviously took a bit of a nosedive until probably Alga Hauer started engaging with people a bit, I suppose. Bert Whistle wasn't writing a test piece. He was writing the music he wanted to write. Henzer wasn't writing a test piece. He just wrote the pieces he wanted to write. And you get these really interesting pieces. One of my favorite pieces of brass band music is contest music. I just think it's an absolute masterpiece. It's funny that it's called contest music because to me that's the least thing it is. It's a real piece of serious brass band music. I remember talking to Simon Dobson about it. He's like, you cannot get a piece of paper in that. It's so tight. It's so well crafted. And yeah, the craftsmanship, I think that's kind of missing. But when it comes to me, I think although people think I'm a bit of a brass band composer, I haven't really written that much brass band music. Pretty much every single piece has been for Tredegar Band. And out of those, I've written probably 3 test pieces. The first one was Destroy Trample as Swiftly as She, and I was not thinking about a typical test piece. I just wanted to write this piece of music that really showed off the band. It's a bit of a bonkers piece in a way. It doesn't fit the rules and regulations that people expect from a test piece. The next piece was called Prophecies. I just wrote the piece I wanted to write. And then the last piece I did was So Spoke Albion. And So Spoke Albion is probably the most test piecey piece I've ever written. Only in that it does a certain number of things. There's a slow movement in the middle. There's a number of solos that everyone gets to feature in. It has a big ending that we expect. But first and foremost was always the music. It was always the notes, the harmony, the structure. That's the thing that drives me all the time. And it's funny. It's like, I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a piece that will do all these things. And then I hope that it will become a piece that is taken on by other bands. And even that has not really been, I think only one other band has picked that piece up. And so I thought, okay, I don't really know what I meant to do then. Like, I thought if you followed the rules of the test piece and it went down well, that's it, bands will start playing it. But I don't think that is the case, really. But then that also goes to the people who choose test pieces. There's not that many competitions where the band gets to choose their own test piece. Most of the time, they're set. And unfortunately, most of the people who are making the decisions in the banding world, let's say I have issues with their taste levels, let's put it that way. And so, my music just never, ever even gets a look in, which is fine. I'm doing my own stuff. But I do think it's a shame. And I do think, how am I meant to encourage younger composers who are not from the banding world to come and write pieces for band when there's such an expectation on the sort of stuff they should be writing? And how do you also encourage people who are within the banding world to just open their horizons a bit? So much, it's become an echo chamber. I really think that, people are listening to brass band test pieces and then they're writing more brass band test pieces and then that's influencing more. Honestly, so many of them are sort of the same. There's a massive ending. Every single instrument has a really crazy cadenza that goes up to top E's and low F's, and there's a funk section for some reason. Every piece now has some sort of Middle Eastern influence for some reason. It's sort of like, I don't quite know how you encourage young composers who have a really unique sound and style to come into this and be able to write the music they want to write. I was judging the Young Composers competition for the National Youth Band recently. We had some really great winners. But originally, when that first went out, it was a very specific sort of requirement where said, it has to be either a march or a piece of music that could fit into a concert in a tonal style. There's all these requirements. And I said, you are completely limiting the amount of people who will show an interest in this. You have to broaden it up. And isn't that what we want? We don't want just more of the same, right? We want interesting composers who are intrigued by brass bands and the sonic possibilities they have. But if you start saying, it's got to be this, they'll just tap out because they're like, well, that's not the music I write. And we lose all these people. We've all probably lost a generation or 2 or 3 of really great composers who will probably never want to write for brass band now because they've been put off by it all. And I think that's a real shame. And the second we opened it up, we just got this huge variety of composers putting in music, real interesting selection of stuff. But yeah, back to your question about me, do I approach things differently? I haven't until So Spoke Albion, which to me is the most, like I said, the most test piecey piece I've ever written in a way. Most of the other things I've written for band, like Dark Arteries, it's the same kind of music that I would have written if I was writing for orchestra. My Concerto Grosso, that is with an orchestra. And there's obviously a lot of brass band influences in that. musically speaking, but it's still the piece of music I wanted to write. But I think the test piece format is flawed. I think there needs to be some sort of overhaul of how we approach that. There needs to be younger blood in these positions that choose these pieces. There needs to be more people who have their finger on the pulse, who are not just in the brass band world, but are looking outside of it as well. You know, maybe we'd end up with some really interesting pieces. But then, you know, you think like historically, sometimes we have that, and then the brass band world treats them horribly. Look at Judith Bingham, Prague, I think a masterpiece. She was treated awfully for that. Muckleflugger a few years ago, Rory Boyle, treated awfully. I remember one of the complaints was that the B-flat bassist had a top E in it or something. And I thought, how many test pieces do you know that finish on a top E for soprano or have a top F for euphonium? Is it that much of a extreme thing that you'd ask a B-flat bass to play a top E in 2023 or whenever it was? So yeah, I think we have a real bad habit of frightening people away. I mean, even someone like John McCabe, the first piece he wrote was received badly, and then he sort of did a Shostakovich. He came back and kind of wrote this a kind of apology piece, Cloudcatcher, which is also a masterpiece. I mean, it's still, to me, it's a piece of music by John McCabe, but he's managed to mold it into the sort of thing that I think brass bands are more prone to engage with.
It's kind of been the brass band way, actually, right throughout my life and long before. I mean, we've heard pieces like Life Divine back in the 1920s causing an absolute furore, mainly because it was so difficult, so technically difficult for so many players in the band. And even later than that, pieces like Spectrum, Energy, Images, as you said, by John McCabe. You know, I remember playing Images, and you know, bands were pulling out of contests because they just didn't fancy playing it. You know, it was a great piece. I remember playing it with Peter Parks, and it was fantastic.
It's certainly a great piece. It was not exactly the most progressive piece at the time. You think of some of the music that was being written in the orchestral world and the contemporary music world at the time, completely wild. Compared to that, it was kind of a walk in the park.
Going back to your fledgling years as a composer, what was it that drove you to compose in the first place? You know, were there any major influences on that decision? Or how important were brass bands in that early journey for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family that were all brass band players. So I was given a cornet when I think I was 3, and I don't remember learning to play. Everyone's just in the band, and it was just sort of something we did on a Tuesday and a Friday. My granddad conducted the band, and one day he just asked if I could make an arrangement of some Andrew Lloyd Webber song. I can't remember what it was. Didn't know what I was doing, but I just sat down at the age of 10 or 12 or something and just cobbled together this arrangement. And then I thought, oh, actually, I quite like sort of moving notes around on a page. I thought that was quite a fun thing. Anyway, as time went on, I realized that like being creative was sort of, I guess, more important to me than just playing. When you play an instrument, you've got to do your bit, play as part of the band or the orchestra, do what the conductor says. And if you don't agree with their choices, tough, you just have to do it. But there was a lot more autonomy when you're making your own stuff. And I just liked putting things together and seeing what they sound like. You know, I was obsessed with Lego when I was younger. I love making things out of small blocks. So I just became more and more interested in it, did it more and more and more. I mean, I studied French horn at the Royal Northern College of Music, but I also studied composition, and that was the only music college that let me do that. I got into a few other places, but they said you either do horn here or composition. And at that age, I was like, I don't want to give up either. I think I've only just started this composition thing, and I'm quite good at my horn. I want to keep doing that. That's sort of where it really, I think, started for me, where I started to take it a bit more seriously, composing. The sound of the brass band is so overpowering and overwhelming, and it's so big. And I sort of seek out those kind of big sounds. I mean, a lot of the music I write is big. It's big stuff. I mean, the piece for brass band and orchestra, if you hear it in real life, the sound is insane. It's a huge noise. I used to find it really hard to write chamber music, string quartet or trios and things. The sound was tiny in comparison. And so I was always trying to find these big, how do I make big sounds out of that? And it's taken me quite a long time to kind of go, you don't always have to do that. Like, it's okay to play with more delicate, ethereal, smaller sound worlds sometimes. So I struggled with that for a long time and quite enjoy it now. It's a bit of a balm sometimes. If I've written a lot of orchestral works, it's quite nice to have a little piano trio to write after that. It sort of clears the palette a bit. But I think brass bands were really important because it was really the only music that I knew. I didn't know any other music, didn't know any orchestral music, apart from like the odd bit of film music. I was obsessed with Jurassic Park, so I knew that really well. And any orchestral music that I did get would have come through brass band arrangements that I would have played or heard. And I suppose the first piece that really made me go, oh, that's really interesting, I didn't know a band could sound like that, that's fascinating, was Blitz. I look back on that piece now and I feel it's a bit twee, actually. Like Derek Bourgeois, he sort of pumps out loads of music and it's all a little bit twee, I think. But at the time, that piece blew my mind, particularly the opening, chords, how chaotic the piece sounded, how violent it sounded. to my 14-year-old ears.
Of course, it was another one of these pieces that caused a massive fuss at the time. I remember it very well. But actually, I do remember also going to listen to it at the Albert Hall and thinking, well, what was all the fuss about? Because so much it was just lovely, really lovely tonal music. A lot of the chat at the time was more about the subject matter than anything else, because it was actually only 35 years after the war had finished. So there were still quite strong memories of that at the time. It's strange how we get ourselves tied up in knots about these things, don't we?
Cloudcatcher Fells really shifted my ideas of, well, writing for brass bands, but also kind of the music that I wanted to write. I mean, even now, as far as I'm concerned, that piece and Contest Music are the two great masterpieces of brass band writing. And I could listen to that piece endlessly and still find just so many of the colors he made. He doesn't do anything crazy. Like, the percussion is very limited. He's not doing anything. There's no weird techniques. He's not asking players to do anything crazy. Just simple, well-constructed harmony. Like, there's a point at where I think there's a euphonium and a flugel in unison or in octaves or something. It's really high. That sound stayed with me for so long. I've never heard that before, that piece. I guess, obviously, he's looking at the Lake District, and I cannot hear that piece without seeing the places. It's so vivid and just an absolute masterpiece. But that really shifted the way I thought about writing, just the kind of way he just sort of blocks things. Sometimes it's just these walls of sound. It's so simple, so effective, and doesn't need to do any silly tricks, just proper, well-written music.
Of course, when you look at them on the page today, these pieces that you're mentioning, great classics, they actually look quite easy on the page. They'll be difficult to play still in 100 years' time. We've been listening to So Spoke Albion just before we came on, of course played by Tredegar at the 2022 European Championships in Birmingham. Brought the house down. You've got a remarkable relationship with Tredegar going back many years, including, of course, that memorable appearance at the Proms. How did that come about in the first place, and what have been the real highlights for you in that 15 years or so?
I knew Ian Porthouse from Manchester when I was studying at the Northern. I had a load of friends who were in Pennine Brass, which he obviously conducted. I actually met him a long, long time ago when I used to play in Flowers Band, and we did a recording with him and Brett Baker. Ian remembers everyone he meets, which is just very impressive. And then he formed this little 10-piece brass group, which I played in, and I just did a load of arrangements and stuff for that. And then that sort of folded. And then after that, he moved to Tredegar. They got through to the Europeans 2011, I think, and asked if I would write a piece for them. And I was like, yep. And I wrote this piece, Destroy Trample, Swift. They did really well on that piece, and it went down really well in the hall. Kind of bonkers, I think, for brass band people, but it seemed to go down well in Europe. But really hard piece. And Ian said they were really concerned about a week before the performances, but just couldn't get their head around it. And then something happened and everything suddenly clicked in that last week or two. And obviously they went and did this amazing performance. I think they came like third or second. And that's kind of where it all started. And the amazing thing about Ian and Tredegar, I mean, to start with, Tredegar are an amazing band who are all lovely. There are no big personalities. Everyone just plays their part really well. And Ian is a really good, low bullshit conductor. He just very straightforward, matter of fact, gets the job done really, really effectively. But they've never prescribed anything. They've just said, write us a piece. They've never, ever once said, we want this, 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 and this. Which is, other bands probably would have said that if they want a test piece. We want to feature this. Our flugelhorn player can do this really weird thing. I want that in there. Our euphonium player can play this amazing pedal G. We need that in there. There's none of that. They just kind of trust me to get on with it. So it's been a very lovely relationship, actually, where they've just given me the creative freedom to write the music I want to write. And they just trust that I'm going to give them something they will enjoy playing. So it's been going on for a long time now. And I mean, really, they're the only band that does play my music. My music isn't really played by any other bands, unfortunately. But Tredegar are my team. And whenever there's a project that I've got in mind, so when I had that job at Rambert, I was the first ever composer in residence. And when I got there, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I've got this idea for a ballet with brass band about the miners' strike. And they went, yeah, that's not going to happen. And then about a year and a half later, Margaret Thatcher died. And they went, actually, that piece you mentioned, can we have a chat about that? And obviously we did it with a bunch of bands, but Tredegar were the one I was working with, and they were the one who came down and did the premiere at Sadler's Wells. And they were just fantastic. They're just so professional and brilliant, and I trust them to do all the work. We recorded that on an album. 2 years ago, I wrote this piece when I got my job with BBC National Orchestra of Wales. Once again, they were like, what's the dream piece you want to write? I said, I've got this idea for a piece of brass band and orchestra. And they were like, yeah, okay, we'll see about that. And then a few days later, that happened. The Proms commissioned it. And we got a brass band down to the Proms, playing with BBC now. They got their own prom after. Yeah, and it's been a really wonderful, fruitful relationship.
And of course, a lot of that is built on collaboration, as you just said, which is a subject that brass bands have embraced in a limited fashion over recent decades. How do you see the future brass band music as part of the wider musical world?
Well, I hope it's an important part. Brass band music is sort of the true British folk music, more so than traditional folk music, I think, which sneaks in from all sorts of places. You know, brass bands only existed in this country for a period of time and was pretty much solely the preserve of the working class for a long period of time. Of course, it's everywhere now. And I think brass band music really speaks to something about us as British people. I think people who've never actually heard a brass band in real life still know what a brass band sounds like. It's such an important part of our culture. But I think over the past 15, 20 years or so, there's been a sort of moving away. We put a lot of blame on Radio 3 or the orchestral world, but a lot of that comes from within the brass band world itself. We've become so insular and completely obsessed with a certain type of music we play, which in my opinion has got worse. That's a controversial thing to say, but I know I'm not the only one who thinks it. I think we need to start talking about it. It's important. We've sort of pushed composers away. Like I said earlier, there's lots of composers who have written for band, and we've treated them badly, and they will probably never write for band again. I mean, I was amazed when Judith Bingham wrote her euphonium concerto. I was like, God, you came back. Good. I think there's a bunch of composers that we should really be engaging with. I could list off probably 25 composers that I think should write for band if we could engage them properly. We've got a real issue with female composers. There are basically none. 2, 3 I can think of. I was looking back over all the test pieces, all men, all white men. And that needs to be rectified quite urgently, I think. So, yeah, it's funny because the standard of playing is so high now. It's so high. And the musicianship is so good. And yet the music that we're playing, I don't think matches the quality, if you see what I mean. And I think that absolutely needs to be addressed and looked at if we want to be taken seriously. I don't think we take ourselves seriously sometimes.
What would be at the very top of your brass band wish list then?
Well, I think we need to have more things like the Festival of Brass. I think we put too much energy and effort into contests, which are weird little things where we play to each other or some people who support the band, and that's it. It's a very weird thing to expect people who are not in the banding world to come and sit through. They're not that fun, I think, to just hear the same piece 25 times. So that is a thing that we have to compete with, and that's the thing I think that stops people just being able to write what they want, because people obviously they want, composers, they want a success. They don't want to have a piece that goes down like a lead balloon. And so I wonder if composers who are writing for band are just writing more music they think people want them to write, instead of just writing the piece of music that they actually want to write. If we actually encourage that kind of culture, I think we could have some really interesting, serious pieces.
It comes down to risk nowadays as well. There was a time when the Albert Hall would have sold out for Three Blind Mice. It wouldn't have mattered what the test piece was. When you talk about Blitz, I went to the Albert Hall, bought my tickets from a guy outside, a ticket tout. They were face value, I was just trying to get rid of them. But it was sold out. People were able to take risks at that time because they knew people would turn up. Regardless, Energy 10 years before that, it wasn't a huge risk. We were going to have a crowd there.
It's amazing how malleable people are. If you tell someone this piece is amazing, and these politicians know this, they've got a message they want to get out, they say it over and over and over and over again. And after a while, people start parroting it back like they thought it themselves. If you put a piece out there apologetically, the audience and the people who you want to buy tickets, they know that you're not convinced by it. You have to tell them over and over again that it's going to be an amazing piece. And really, they need to be going, right, who do we love? What music do we love? What piece do we love? And let's sell that. Let's sell that thing. It's not hard to get composers to come on and talk about their music anymore and do podcasts like this. And most of us are more than happy to do that. But you have to create a buzz around a thing. This is the nice thing about something like the Proms. Whenever there's a big new commission by a big new composer, there's absolutely a buzz around that. I was at the Proms this year, plenty of times, at least 10 times. Every single concert completely rammed, sold out. Every one. They've managed to create a feeling of excitement and interest, and people do want to come and hear the new stuff now. They want to hear that new piece. They want to be there in the room. We can't be there for the premiere of Beethoven 9, but we could be there for the premiere of this composer's new piece.
They've been clever as well, though. They've moved with the times in the Proms. The marketing's been fantastic. Even the way they've changed the programmes nowadays, it's much more appealing to a wider audience, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And that's what brass bands need to do. And there's so many other contests. You mentioned 25 bands playing the same piece. Nobody other than sad old guys like me go and listen to other bands now. But there's only me and 50 of my mates now. The vast majority of people will pick and choose. It'll be Black Dyke and Brickhouse and Corey and Tredegar and whatever. And there's absolutely no way, if anybody was inventing the brass band contest today, they'd say, right, I've got a great idea. Let's get bands to play the same piece 20 times.
Well, I suppose that's why the Europeans' own choices is really popular, right? Because you get to hear all these different music by really amazing bands. I know, obviously, there's a fairness thing when everyone plays the same piece. But for an audience, do I want to hear that piece 25 times? I don't know. The other thing I will just say is I think sometimes things happen and I'm amazed at how the brass band world aren't really engaged. If we can't turn up to support ourselves, how do we expect other people to come up and support,
Then you've got the Royal Northern Festival as well. You go every year, I go every year. You see the same people there every year, but how often do you see anybody from a test piece panel?
Yeah.
How many of the regular adjudicators go? How many conductors do you see there?
Yeah.
There's so much that they could be doing and learning at these events, and it's one of our biggest challenges.
Maybe, not that I'm a proponent of shaming people, but sometimes you have to just shame people and go, why weren't you there? You should have been there. Why on earth weren't you there? You were in the room. I saw you outside. Why were you not inside having listened to the music,
I've made a whole career out of shaming people, Gavin, and I have to tell you, it doesn't make you popular.
No.
There's nothing great about being popular, is there? So
I did have an idea of setting up a festival that would not rival the Northern, but would be a sort of, complement to what happens at the Northern. Originally, it was just going to be a sort of a one-day weekend thing that would be almost entirely contemporary music, and there would be a lot of new pieces, and I would go out and I would get a panel together to decide every year, let's have 4 new commissions and try and get at least 2 female composers each time. So we would build up this new repertoire. And the idea would be that they are composers from outside the banding world, composers who've never written for band before, but have really interesting voices and are interested in exploring that, but maybe haven't had don't know how to get into it, or feel that if they wrote this piece of music, where would it get played? I've tried to engage Radio 3 to record it or to get that stuff out on the radio and just make it a little bit more present. I think you have to be seen and you have to be heard. There was a time when bands were on the TV all the time and you just don't see that anymore. And I think bands have got quite comfortable in just going, okay, well, we're over here doing this thing. And actually, you do have to make a lot of effort to push through now. There's so much noise. There's so many people vying for your attention all the time. Just sitting back and playing the sort of music we play endlessly in little contests is not going to help.
A very positive outlook there. You've mentioned a lot of good people that could be writing for band and the opportunities they could have. There's so much positivity there about what it could be, and a good way to finish this fascinating discussion. Gavin Higgins, thanks very much for your time and for joining us on the Brass Band podcast. I look forward to seeing you at a brass band event, probably not a contest, somewhere very soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Great to hear from an established composer, not just a brass band composer. Gavin creates such wonderful music that I certainly love listening to. So it's great to hear from him. And I know he's so passionate about opportunities for composers. He was our keynote speaker at our conference a few years ago, and it's something he champions.
I think we should just be very proud of the impact that he's making as somebody who really started composing for brass band.
Yeah.
It's great to see somebody making a real mark in the wider musical world.
Yeah. Something that he talks about a lot is the challenges of getting there and how hard that is. And I think that's something that a lot of people feel, getting that first step up, getting that first opportunity. It's hard work and takes a long time. And I think it's harder than it used to be for young people to get those opportunities. I think it's tough.
Different, isn't it?
It's different. It's a different world.
There was a time when they needed a publisher to back you to be able to make any impact at all. Now everybody's a publisher. They've all got their own ways of doing things. Does that mean that the quality is any higher? Not always. I guess some people use these tools better than others. As long as they're expressing their true voices, I guess that's the main thing. But I think what it has done is the modern technology has opened up opportunities in different ways for young composers.
Yeah.
If you look at an event like Brass in Concert, the way that's really evolved over the last few years, quite a lot of young composers are heavily featured. They'll do entire programs for bands, programs that these bands may be using over the next 12 months as well. So I think there's some real positives there.
Yeah.
Some bands are really great examples of how these things can be done effectively and really in an artistically rewarding way as well. Some bands are lucky enough to have a composer within the band, a composer in residence effectively. But these are things that they're investing in. So there is a lot of good aspects yet that we can be pleased about. I think if you go into different countries, certainly look at countries like Norway and Switzerland, other good examples are Holland and Belgium, but they do probably give more opportunities to younger composers and commission test pieces. So there's probably a lot more work to be done in this country. But it's not all bad news.
No, absolutely not. And absolute credit to bands of all levels that champion composers and prioritise commissioning and do that because they feel that it's the right thing to do and appreciate that. And bands are such an amazing driver for new music. Brass in Concert is a brilliant vehicle to showcase a lot of that work.
And one of the busiest people actually within BBE is Beth Lambert, who's a fundraising manager whose work with bands helps them to generate the funds to carry out their own musical ambitions.
Yeah.
And she's constantly fielding questions from bands about how we can raise money to commission somebody to do a work commemorating an event or a special occasion or whatever it happens to look like. So the amount of work that's going on within the banding community in this way is really encouraging. So I think, yeah, we can do better, but
yeah, the desire's still there. People still want to do this and they still value it. I think we've got a long way to go to ensure that continues, to ensure that we've got really strong diversity in the composers that we work with and that we're making active efforts for the whole sector to look at that. But bands want new music, and that's incredible.
Well, we spoke to Gavin earlier, who's very much established on his composing career, but someone else who's just at the start of her musical journey as a composer is Naomi Hill. And Sarah spent some time speaking with Naomi very recently.
I'm joined by the wonderful Naomi Hill, who is here to talk a little bit about her experience as a composer. I first encountered Naomi on our Future Leaders course over the past year. Oh my gosh, it has been a year. Well, hi, Naomi. It's lovely to have you here.
Hello.
If we could just start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself in banding and yourself as a composer?
Yeah, so I am a music educator. I play euphonium and baritone, and I also compose. So I went to Huddersfield University and did an undergraduate music degree there, and then did a master's in performance, which I finished last year. And I now work as a freelance brass tutor and a musician and a composer.
You've told me before that finding opportunities for young composers and champion young composers is something that you're really passionate about. So tell us a little bit about that. And as a young composer, what have the challenges been to kind of get yourself established and get a foot in the door?
Yeah, so I'd say that my composition output kind of increased as I started uni, when suddenly I kind of had access to lots of people that were willing to test things out, and it almost felt kind of quite a controlled environment. And those were the sort of opportunities that gave me a focus and a platform that I could begin to build a composing career on. That kind of led on to, during my studies, I had the opportunity to enter some composition competitions. I entered the Foden's competition and the Unibrass one, which I had success with. And that kind of paved the way for publications and more exposure, which was as a result of having so many opportunities at university. And that's led to commissions in various different contexts. But getting to the point where music is placed on stands in a band room and then programmed to a concert is not an easy task. And without sounding too dull, there are people that are always ready to criticise when a new piece comes out, sometimes in very good humour, but I found it's not always supported. I think because it's not something that's perceived as normal in a lot of contexts. And at the beginning of writing a bit more seriously, that was quite a challenge. But there again, I think all composers have a big challenge. As a general concept, composing is quite difficult. Writing a piece of music in kind of a swamp of millions and millions of compositions is not straightforward. And that's before you get to writing something that gets noticed and writing something that's useful and usable and playable by the masses and that has a future beyond what you initially write it for. And then you kind of narrow that down to writing for brass bands, and the challenge increases even further. The brass band world can be something we can be quite forward-looking, but also backwards-looking at the same time. And having that in the same breath is quite a difficult environment to compose in. But then on the flip side of that, it also has huge, huge potential and is huge potential reach as well. And new commissions do come, but they are few and far between. And when you have so many brass band classics from 50 plus years ago and they stick around, some rightly so, some think that new music maybe isn't needed. So it is quite difficult.
I think that's really interesting to dig into brass bands are forward looking and backwards looking at the same time, because I totally agree with that. There's definitely traditional views as well. Why do you like composing for brass band?
I think for me, it feels like quite a comfy boot to write for brass band. I've grown up in the Salvation Army, so from being a tiny baby, I've heard brass bands every Sunday morning. The sound of a brass band is like a comfy boot to me. And I really enjoy writing for orchestral settings, for choirs, for wind bands, for soloists. But I do always love writing for brass bands. I think the different sounds that you can make is quite a unique combination, and something I do really, really enjoy.
You've mentioned taking part in composition competitions, and that gave you a bit of a springboard. Is that something that you feel's really important? Are those kind of schemes the answer, or do you think there are other things that brass bands or other organisations should do to champion composers?
I think those schemes are really good. It's kind of a bit of a lottery as to whether your piece is seen as being the winner. How you define a winner of a piece is quite a difficult thing. I think that is one thing that, as an aim for someone to write something for the purpose of a scheme like that, is really, really good. But I wouldn't say that's the only thing that we can be doing. I think it has to start younger than that. Some of the children I teach and the schools I work in, particularly with my work with Elland, absolutely love composing. They're young brass players coming to the brass lesson, and they will beg to write a piece in their lesson that they then play as a warm-up. And for them, the excitement of that composing is not affected in any way by any, oh, I can't do this, I'm not allowed to do this. To them, it's normal. Writing a piece of music is completely normal. They don't see it as inaccessible because it's become normal to them. And this micro scale little project in the teaching that I do of my brass children composing pieces for them to play and them for their peers to play has shown me that a culture of composing is possible at all levels, from children as young as 5 to as old as 18 and then beyond that.
An absolute credit to you as an educator to prioritise that in your practice, because not everyone thinks to, not everyone's capable of doing that, to be honest, because composition, even for a lot of professionals, feels really, really scary. But I think it's something that we talk about in our education team a lot around improvisation as well. Everyone feels it's really, really scary, but we do improvisation with kids in their first few weeks of blowing an instrument, and it's not scary if you don't say that it's scary. And I think it's the same thing with composing. Building blocks of improvisation is just your first steps into composing, but it's just we don't always frame it in that way.
Yeah, and it also works hand in hand with them learning their instruments as well, them restricting it to just 3 notes that they can use in this piece, and those are the 3 notes that they can play, which then means that they're not writing something that is beyond what they can then play. And it also allows them to focus on those 3 notes for this half an hour lesson and then create something that has a funny title. I had a child call a piece The Peas with Knees. I've had all sorts of funny titles like that. And yeah, the excitement of that, it's fun, but it's also a huge, huge learning opportunity and something that also provides new material in a world where there's not a lot of new brass teacher material being made, yet these children able to make material that is accessible and fun and able to progress them. And that is kind of a bit of a gap in the market of brass band teaching resources.
Obviously your composition and your teaching goes hand in hand, I guess. Do you feel there's a specific skill set to composing for younger or beginner players? And how did you learn those skills? Was it just on the job, or did you actively go out to look to compose for young people?
Yeah, I mean, I regularly write pieces for all ages, from my very first learner players to contesting band standard. Composing for the younger children, I've written quite a lot of pieces this year for Elland Starter Band, who I conduct now, and writing specifically for an ensemble where you know who's sat in the chairs and who's in the section is really beneficial in writing something that is going to sound amazing, because they can all play the parts that you are writing or will be able to play by the time it comes to performing them. Yeah, it's got to be simple. It's got to be something that's engaging in terms of the title, in terms of the content. And it's also got to be something that teaches them something, which is quite hard. In some ways, it's harder than writing for full brass band because you're limited with what you can do, which somehow is harder. But then also it's in some ways easier because you know who you've got if you're writing for someone that you know or a group that you know. In some ways, that's a more rewarding project because you can see the development from them first being given the part and it being a brand new piece, and then being excited by the fact that it's been written for them as well. I wrote some pieces for Ellen Starter Band, and one of the children asked me, "Why has it got your name on the piece of music?" I then had to explain the concept that these pieces of music are written by people. And I think even that whole concept of that this piece of paper in front of you is not just some magic trick. It is, there's a human behind it that's written it. And that to them was kind of mind boggling for a lot of them anyway. Even learning that whole process, that it has started somewhere, them asking where it started, and then that's been something that's been written for them, and then they can perform it, and then someone can enjoy hearing that. I think that whole process, that circle of a piece of music being written, is something that's completely missed out of many things, not just in brass banding, but in, you know, a pop song. Children realising that that's come from probably someone sat at the piano or sat at a computer, and that whole cycle of something being created is a really kind of hidden away thing.
And what an amazing experience for Ellen Starter Band to have access to that experience and to tap into you. That must be really wonderful for them. I hope that there are composers that come out of that group. I wouldn't be surprised if that increases that likelihood, just having that connection and understanding and context of what that all means. So, Naomi, what advice would you give someone who is considering taking their composition forward more seriously and diving in?
My kind of number one piece of advice would be to be curious about how the music is put together and to put yourselves into the players' seats, which I think is easy if you play in a band. You will have an idea of what that part looks like in the context of a brass band. You will have seen many pieces of music and you will know kind of what that looks like and where the limits are, where things are a bit weird, or what you really enjoy playing, what are the sort of things that you can expect to see. So I would say that looking at all of the parts, looking at what a part looks like, for example, what a bass trombone part looks like. I remember when I was a teenager, first starting to write, and I had no idea what a bass trombone part looked like. Absolutely no idea. I'd never even looked at it. But looking at it as an individual part rather than on a score and seeing what that looks like in context and how that must feel sat in that seat was hugely beneficial for me. So yeah, putting yourself in the players' seats, think about how it looks, how does it feel, and how that would work in the context of a band. Starting small, we've already talked about writing for young ensembles. That for me was something that reined me back in from going too big too soon in terms of scoring and having too much going on at the same time. Actually writing in 4 parts is hugely beneficial. I remember someone gave me that advice that, you know, write in 4 parts, go back to basics and lay it out in 4 parts and just write 4 parts instead of 100 and have just those things going on, a melody and some accompaniment, and start small, and then you can expand. And on that, seek advice and also take advice. There's so many wise people. I was privileged to have a lot of people give me advice that I still use now. People that invested in the compositions that I'd written and gave me advice in what about this, what about this, and this is what I do, you might want to try this. That sort of thing, you can never be taken for granted. Reading and listening widely, particularly at university, I would always get scores out of the library and have a look at what the score looks like, even though all the yellow ones, what they look like, and get a bit nerdy in a way about what the composer's doing. I always think it's kind of like a huge jigsaw puzzle when you look at a score. Everything is lined up and then scattered around, and then you put it on the stands and then it's played and it all becomes clear what's going on. But then I always feel like when that's then taken to the performance stage or the contest stage, it becomes kind of like a 3D jigsaw. It's no longer just an idea or just a piece. It's got some sort of meaning behind it. Another massive thing, which I feel very passionate about, is taking pride in how the music looks. I'm very picky with wonky dynamics, and I will spend hours and hours moving dynamics by a millimetre. Yeah, a score that looks pretty and neat makes people happy. And it also allows for no questions. You don't have any hands up in rehearsals saying, why have I got this MF here, or why have I got no crescendo? At university, actually, someone said, you know, don't give them an opportunity to question what you want on the page. Make it super clear. And on that note, get your music on the stands. That's not as easy as what I just made it sound. It's really, really, really hard. And it's scary. But bands and conductors and people in general are often very, very encouraging. And so find those opportunities. And also, I think there's a responsibility for us to give those opportunities as well. And for that to be something that becomes normal. People that are creating music in the brass band world are given a platform in which it can be tested out and feedback given, because that's one of the most valuable things, I think.
You said that getting music on a stand can be challenging. How have you been able to get your music into a concert programme? How has that worked for you?
I'd say that's even harder than getting a band to play it in a band room. You can look at so many concert programmes and see that there's piece after piece, which should be very, very similar to another band down the road that are doing a concert in a few months' time or a few months previous. And a piece being a really good concert piece, and so it's just put on a concert every single time. Getting out of that cycle is hard, I think. And I guess understandably so in a culture that is so historic. And it takes a conductor, a musical director, to be willing for something new to be used. And in some ways, it's a risk, because when you play something like I'll Walk With God, which is a huge, good concert finisher, bands across the country play it. You play something like that, you know what the reaction's going to be. You know that that's a good concert finisher. That's it. That's kind of job done. End of a concert. Sorted. But trying something new and knowing how that's going to be taken by the audience is a really difficult thing for a band to trust the conductor to do, and also for the composer to feel good enough for that to be, put on a program. I think that's a really, really hard thing. I've written quite a few pieces for entertainment contests, mainly uni brass, where that's a huge platform to write something specific for a specific project, for a specific storyline, and trusting someone enough to do that and going along with that idea is also really, really hard. But having a platform and opportunities given for that sort of thing, I think, is a really valuable next step for brass bands. Mm-hmm. My ultimate aim is that there will be somewhere that people can be signposted to in terms of, if you're interested in composing for brass band, then this is where you go. But
so
there isn't anywhere.
The go-to directory for brass band composers, is that what you want to see? Not making promises, but I'll look into it. Thank you so much, Naomi. It's been great to speak to you, and really excited to follow your journey and see what exciting opportunities come up for you next. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
So we talked a little bit about how bands prioritise commissioning, how different organisations prioritise commissioning. Kenny, what do you want from BBE over the next 10 years? Where do you want to see us in this space?
I definitely think BBE has a role to play here. We mentioned earlier the role we can play with our member bands and advising them how they can fulfil their ambitions and helping them to find the finance for these things. I think it's very important that they don't expect things just to be done for nothing for them. When you're looking at professional composers, or even young composers who are cutting their teeth on these things, it's important that they're well rewarded for it. So one of the roles that we can play there is facilitating the band's dreams. They have the imagination to come up with a project, so we can definitely help them to do that. We are going to be working very hard on the European Championships in the next few years. There will be a plethora of commissioning being done in the next few months. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. Working also towards the future of youth band music, I think is very, very important for us. We saw the success we had with the Phillips Park piece earlier this year, and the reaction for the participants was wonderful. The way that they tackled playing the music for a start, you could see they were all finding it very rewarding. So I think there's a lot more for us to do on that front. We won't have a brand new commission every year for that. We'll have to spread the goodwill around all levels of banding, but it's certainly an area that we need to focus. Yeah, we do have a role to play in leading our community, I think, towards its ambitions in that front. So yeah, a lot of work for us to be doing, Sarah, a lot of fundraising applications to be written and a lot of imagination to be called up.
I think so. When I speak to bands, I see a lot of people who are so keen to do this. And often Beth and I, the conversations that we have are, you've got the best gem of an idea here. Let's light a fire under it. Let's make it bigger. That's often the conversation that we're having.
I think bands come to us often with a small idea, often a very good idea, but they might not appreciate every aspect of the project.
Yeah, and the time and complexity and cost, all of these things are barriers, and we can help with all of those things, but that is definitely a big barrier in actually getting from an idea to having it commissioned. The time frame, often just from it needing to be done, you to find a composer, you to have the funds, all of that, it takes a long time. I agree. I think we've got a really good role to play there in making those ideas become a reality, but also making sure that bands of every level are involved in that and get those opportunities. If you've got a training band that you can only play 5 notes, you should still get new music. It should still be out there for you just as much as the championship bands playing on a European stage. And I think that's definitely where I'll be driving. This series of the Brass Band podcast is brought to you by Brass Bands England. Thank you to Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund and Youth Music for their support. Thanks also to World of Brass for the beautiful music they have provided. To listen to all of the music from this episode and so much more, head to wobplay.com. That's wobplay.com.
To find out more about this series and the wider work of Brass Bands England, head over to our website at bbe.org.uk and follow us on social media.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. Make sure you subscribe to avoid missing any of our upcoming episodes and share your favourite moments on social media using the hashtag BrassBandPodcast. Thanks for listening and stay tuned.